Have you been thinking about buying your first investment property in the Shoreline, Washington area? Buying an investment property can be exciting and scary at the same time. I've been investing for 18 years all across the country. And so, as a real estate broker here in Shoreline, I'd like to just break down some things to keep in mind as you're deciding how to buy your first investment property in Shoreline, Washington, and whether it actually makes sense for you or not. This is Emily Cressy, your digitally enabled Puget Sound community advisor. The first thing to keep in mind is, what are your investment objectives? Different investors use a variety of techniques depending on their investment strategies. For example, when I was young and broke, my number one goal was to acquire property with no money down. So getting in on terms like a lease option and subject to was how I got started, because I didn't have a lot of cash. I had more time than money. A lot of investors look for properties that need a lot of work, big rehab projects that they can repair things and then make it nicer. And then another strategy would be a long-term buy and hold. So depending on your objectives, the strategy that you choose to use can vary. I like long-term buy and hold because I feel like that appreciation is where a lot of the fortunes are made in real estate. Just buy and hold and let it grow. Planting a tree for tomorrow. So for me, my investment objectives tend to be nowadays around appreciation. And the big question then becomes, if I'm buying a home in an appreciating market, the appreciating markets tend to be more expensive to purchase a home. For example, California has been a big appreciating market. And of course, here in Seattle, Washington, especially the Shoreline area where I live, has appreciated enormously. I think 8% is the average appreciation rate year over year for the past decade. So that's been strong. Obviously, we're coming out of that 2008 slump when things all went south after the mortgage crisis. So for me, appreciation is number one, but cash flow is also important. And the thing that's the big downside about buying here in Shoreline is that we tend to have negative cash flow properties. You could buy a house that costs $600,000. That's about the price of a starter home these days, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in Shoreline. And it's only going to rent out for about $2,000 a month. Now, if you've heard of the 1% rule when it comes to investing, that means in order to get good cash flow on the property, you want to rent it out for about 1% of the purchase price. So the monthly rental of $2,000 would equate to buying a home for $200,000. And you can see, if we're actually buying the home for $600,000, we're not going to have positive cash flow. In fact, the opposite. Most people have negative cash flow. Ways you can mitigate negative cash flow are buying a property with a large down payment. So if you want to buy that $600,000 property and put a full 25% down, if you have $150,000 in cash, you can invest it that way. You could also mitigate it by getting a multifamily. So maybe a fourplex would have slightly better cash flow than just a single family home. Oftentimes people will do this with their house, where they'll live in one side, and then if they have an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, like a little cabin in the back or an apartment over the garage, or maybe it's a duplex and they rent out one side. Maybe it's their house and they're young and wild and free and they have roommates and they're okay with having a couple other people living in the house. But getting more people involved in the property as a way to help offset the mortgage payment can help mitigate negative cash flow. But typically what you're going to be looking at is a negative cash flow situation month to month. And this is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Might run closer to like $3,000 or $3,500 on this type of a property in today's market conditions, versus your $2,000, $2,500 income. And don't forget, on top of that, you're going to have to do some repair. It's not a set it and forget it. When you have any property, you're going to have to eventually replace things. Roof, the furnace goes out, new paint and carpet from time to time, lawn care. There's things to do to make sure that the property stays in good condition. And of course, if you have a problem like a big vacancy or someone does damage on the way out, you should be prepared for that. So in addition to the month-to-month vacancy, you'll have these periodic expenses that you'll need to address. So getting in, is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for the cash poor. But if you have, let's say you're an IT professional, you have a lot of cash, you want to find a good place to invest it, investing in Shoreline can definitely work for you. So what I consider to be the secret sauce is the appreciation, and this is what makes it all worthwhile. Like I said, we've had an average of 8% a year over the last several years. Zillow is predicting 11% next year. Other national market trends I've seen are predicting 7% for the Seattle area. I always like to be conservative on my figures, so I'm going to use 6 for the case of this modeling. But what I use financial calculators. You can go on my website. I'll provide a link. You can see where they are, or you can just Google it. But what I like to do is actually model out what's the rate of return. So let's think about how much money you're putting in upfront. Let's say you're putting in $150,000 upfront plus $10,000 for closing costs. That's your cash outlay. And then you have, let's say, $1,000 a month in negative cash flow. And this is very simplified. We don't know how much vacancy you'll end up having, how much your turnovers will cost, if rents will go up during that period of time to offset some of those things. So we're just simplifying it down. But we can see that if you took a $600,000 home and appreciated it at 6% per year for 10 years, which is the average length of time that a homeowner stays in his home before moving, that's just a nice figure. So anyway, in that period of time, the home would appreciate. Again, this is a model. It's not a promise of future results. I don't have a crystal ball. Math says that appreciation rate will drive the value to over $1 million. So at that point, between the loan pay down and the appreciation, you'd be looking at about $700,000 in equity in the property, which, again, going back to the financial calculators, gives us a rate of return of about 12%. Which is very good. It's similar to the rate of return that we can expect from the stock market and in the good decades. But remember, there are tax write-offs and diversification that comes from doing something like this. If you're in a position where you're able to do some forced improvement to the property, let's say you buy something that's a little run down, and by the time you get ready to sell it, you've fixed it up or improved it in some way, then that's another opportunity for you to create additional value and additional appreciation over that time period. You may have some tax benefits as well. So this is kind of how the math works. And if you were to sell it at that point, if you wanted to cash out of your equity, you would have some transaction costs. For my investments, I usually allow 10% cost of sales. That's real estate commission, excise taxes, closing costs, title insurance, vacancies, some repairs that have to get done after the last tenant leaves. So 10% cost of sale still leaves you a very good rate of return. Excuse me. And so this is kind of how the numbers work. And again, remember, we're being conservative on our 6%. If it were to return higher, your returns could be significantly larger. If it were to return less, you would have less of a return. And remember, the numbers are very similar, whether this is something that you're buying purely as an investment to rent out or whether you're buying a home to live in. The key here is to hold it for a long time to offset the acquisition costs and the sales costs. Hold it for a long time to allow the home to appreciate. If you can, get a low interest rate on your loan. And with the interest rates being as low as they are, I think getting a lot of financing, using a small down payment and financing 90% potentially or more, if that's possible for you, can also improve your rate of return. So this was about how to buy your first investment property in Shoreline, whether it's a home that you live in and you want to make sure it's a good investment, whether it's a rental that you're just going to buy a house and rent it out, or whether it's maybe a multi-unit, a duplex, a fourplex that you may live in or that you may rent out. There's a spectrum of possibilities. and there's a lot of good to be had. The difficulty is that this is a very strong market. It's hard to get those big discounts on prices that a lot of rehabbers like to get. So that strategy in this marketplace is more difficult to use and to get a big price deduction. There are still those types of things happening, but even what I'm seeing is the homes that are very, cosmetically unappealing are still getting snapped up by owner occupants, and they're almost always going to pay more than someone who's just looking for a good deal on a house. But anyway, that's today. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. By the time you watch this, things may be very different. So why don't you get in touch with me? You can leave me a comment, send me a private message, go through my website, homeproassociates.com, or reach out to me. I'll put some links below. And I'd love to, I love talking to investors, whether you are an investment-minded homeowner or just someone that wants to get a good rate of return. Even if you're not sure that Seattle is the right market and you're thinking about investing out of state, which I have done a lot of, I would love to talk to you just because it's fun. So reach out to me and let me know how I can help. This has been Emily Cressy with HomeProAssociates.com, and I am here to serve.